Hello, staff. Thank you for joining me once again, where people continue without let or hindrance to be wrong on the interwebs. I know, it's incredible, unbelievable. Here we have a relatively new YouTuber, all young and keen and shiny, apparently, but unfortunately not possessed of the knowledge that would be required to speak on the topic she's chosen to speak on, as evidenced by the fact that everything she's about to say is demonstrably, clearly, objectively wrong, completely wrong. Really, really poor video, Tilly. This is Tilly Zarrella, I think her name is. Apologies if I got that wrong. As I say, a fairly new YouTuber with almost no following, but somebody put me onto her, so I thought let's have a look and see if she's as bad as I'm told. Sorry, really, really appalling, Tilly. Not the first clue of what you're talking about, unfortunately. I can't show favour, really, to anybody on the interwebs, frankly. You put yourself out there, it makes you fair game, and what you've had to say is fucking stupid. So I'm going to point to it, and all my thousands of followers are going to see it, and they're going to go, oh, dear. And, yeah. Hopefully others will learn from this and learn that what you should do is actually stay in your lane and talk about that which you are indeed actually objectively expert in. And in the case of Tilly here, is she objectively expert in human nutrition and the physiological requirements of human beings, or indeed exercise physiology, all things I absolutely am objectively expert in? The answer is no, I'm sorry. Unfortunately not. Right, okay, Tilly, enough from me. Let's hear from you so that we can put you right where you're wrong. And spoiler, boys and girls, guess what? Yep, it's fucking everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Tilly and I am a strength and conditioning coach.
Great, what are your qualifications for strength and conditioning coaching, love? And shouldn't you be doing that rather than talking about nutrition? Because that's a completely different area of expertise, isn't it? Okay.
If you're new here, I just want to remind you to like and subscribe because it'll mean you get to stay up to date with some really cool sports science discussion.
Sports science, you say? Yeah, that's my area of expertise, actually, among other things. It's one of, well, 4 really genuinely expertise areas of mine, 4 areas in which I'm a published research scientist, consultant, and indeed former senior lecturer. Tilly here, on the other hand, seems to think that, I don't know, I don't even know what your qualifications are, love. Perhaps you should tell us. Because I did look to see if I could find them at all listed anywhere on your YouTube page. No. Anywhere on your Instagram? No. I don't know. It doesn't matter if you don't have any qualifications, so long as what you're saying is robust and correct and worthwhile hearing. It isn't. Sorry about that. All right, anyway, let's make some progress.
And you'll definitely hear all about the research behind each topic.
Yes, all about the research. Tell us about the research. Good.
I wanted to make this video today because every couple of years we get the new iteration of the low-carb diet. Previously, it was the keto diet or the Paleolithic diet. More recently, I've been seeing people like Liver King telling his millions of followers that an all-meat diet is the way to go for health, longevity, and performance. And quite frankly, this is just such f***ing bullshit.
No, it isn't. Sorry about that, Tilly, to correct you on your factually incorrect statement there. Human beings are absolutely genetically adept at being obligate hypercarnivores. That is what we are. That is how we've evolved over at least 4.5 million years. That is what the science actually tells us unequivocally about human physiology. Obligate hypercarnivores is what we are. A diet consisting solely of the muscle meats and associated fats of mostly large ruminant animals is what's indicated. Not so much the liver. No, not so much the organs. You can if you like, to some degree, but it's not required. Everything that you need nutritionally you will find in the muscle meat and associated fat of large ruminant animals. Grass-fed if you please. Thanks very much. What's next?
As my profession is strength and conditioning, today we are going to...
Okay, well, what are your qualifications for that? Strength and conditioning. Again, I did look, and you didn't publish any qualifications at all. As I say, it doesn't matter if you don't have any, fine, so long as what you're saying is correct. And unfortunately, with regard to what you've got to say here today, not a good start for your YouTube career. Sorry about that.
We're going to be talking about how it is physically impossible for you to do high-intensity exercise and perform well on a low-carb diet.
Is that true, Ted?
Bias!
Yeah, no, I thought it wasn't true. More to say, is there, Ted, on the issue? Himself there so much, but he's right. That is absolutely one of the most ridiculous fucking statements I have ever heard, Tilly. It is false. It's demonstrably false. It's absolutely unequivocally false. The exact dietary requirement for carbohydrates for human beings is not 1 gram ever, whether you are an athlete or whether you are not. Actually, we'll get to that in a bit, though, when you start talking about the actual science, which you promised us you were going to talk about, perhaps.
If you disagree, you can either click away or you can keep watching and see if some of the research will change your mind.
Or indeed, I could make a video about your ridiculous video here where you've got everything wrong that thousands and thousands of people will watch, Tilly. Because that's what I do. I put right the wrongs where people get it wrong on the interwebs, among other things. I also do other things as well. I'm not just purely a corrector of wrong people, but it's quite a popular line of videos. People watch them. That's why I keep making them. And people like you keep being wrong, demonstrably wrong, clearly wrong, absolutely wrong without question. There's a never-ending supply of people being wrong on the interwebs. Not to mention arrogant. Not to mention Dunning-Kruger sufferers of the highest order. Not to mention people from a younger generation than myself, Tilly, who seem to have been brought up by their parents, people around my age, perhaps, and old and younger, that is, who, seem to have brought their children up to believe that every child should win a prize and that everything that you have to say is valid because you've had to say it. No, I'm afraid it isn't valid. I'm afraid you're wrong and you need to be corrected.
First, let's talk about what a carb is and how much of it we need to eat.
This will be interesting.
Carbohydrates are found in so many different food sources.
Well, they're found in a very, very small amount, in the one actual food source for humans, that being the flesh of animals. But every other source that you're going to talk about that is from a plant is not actually food for human beings. Sorry about that.
Think fruits, vegetables.
Yeah, they're not food for humans.
Grains.
No, definitely not. Grains are the last thing, one of the last things that human beings should eat. The only thing they should eat less than grains is industrial seed oils.
And they're related products like breads, pastas.
They're not food.
Everything, really. Although obviously some food sources have higher content of carbohydrate than others. Carbohydrates are our brain and our spinal cord's favorite food to eat.
No, not to eat. No. You don't need to eat carbohydrates to have an adequate supply of carbohydrates for your brain and your spinal cord, and also for all your muscles as well. Your body is capable of manufacturing all the glucose that is required for these purposes itself. And in fact, our genetic design is that it should do that. It's called Gluconeogenesis. You might want to go and look it up before you make your next video about human nutrition, Tilly, because this is a stunning mistake you've made here. You're assuming the body can't make its own. It can. All that's required. You don't need to eat 1 gram of carbohydrates ever. And you shouldn't, actually. You shouldn't eat any carbohydrates. There are a lot of problems associated with eating carbohydrates, which are covered in great detail over a significant number of years, actually, on my fine YouTube channel and my other channel on that other platform that you might have to take an odyssey of discovery to go and find out where that is. But if you undertake such an odyssey, I'm sure you'll find it. And you'll find more than 1,500 videos about all sorts of things, largely, though, about the complete zero requirement for carbohydrates in human beings, be they athletes or be they not. actually, Tilly. Perhaps you should go and have a look at all of those before you make another video. If nothing else, it'll keep you quiet for a while, and that's probably going to be a good thing because you really ought not to be making these kind of videos, love. Okay, what's next?
Favorite form of energy. And because of this, the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for
The acceptable macronutrient distribution range? Says who? According to who? Who the purple fuck told you this? Goodness me, I've got a really itchy nose. Perhaps it's a judgment on me for being nasty to shiny young new YouTube creators. We should be encouraging. Yes, I'm trying to be as encouraging as I can, Tilly, but you really are not making it easy for me because everything you're saying is so inane. It's so fucking stupid. Wow. Acceptable macronutrient acceptable to whom? Because I'll tell you what, the acceptable range of carbohydrates is physiologically, I've already mentioned it. It's none, not 1 single gram ever. No carbohydrates are required in the human diet. Okay?
Carbohydrate is between 45 and 60%.
No, it fucking isn't. It's 0%. None at all. Wrong.
This means of all of our total calories, carbohydrates should make up.
Calories are heat, by the way, lovely. They're not a measurement of the food that's the energy that's found in food. Okay? The energy found in food for human beings is in a chemical form, not in the form of photons of light, which is what calories are. Okay? Not visible light, it's infrared. Nonetheless, electromagnetic radiation, waves in the electromagnetic field, if you like. Point particles, if you want to think of them as photons, waves, if you want to think of them as, all of that. Okay, actual science and physics and stuff. Right, so, it is not appropriate to assert that the energy found in foods can be measured in the form of calories. There's no interconvertibility there. Humans lack the machinery to make that conversion between that form of energy and the form that we actually do use, the chemical form. Ergo, it's nonsensical and rubbish and anti-science to do so. Anyway, let's not get too bogged down. What's next?
Up between 45 and 60%.
No, 0% is how much carbohydrate you need exogenously in your diet. None at all, not 1 gram ever.
That's the majority of our food.
No, that's a mistake. That is a huge mistake, and you'll pay the price for that at some point.
Quite a lot, really. And that's because it actually takes about 125 to 150 grams of carbs every day just to keep your brain and your spinal cord or your central nervous system running smoothly.
And that's why your body is capable of generating that exact amount, and indeed more than that if it needs to itself. There is absolutely no requirement to consume any carbohydrates at all. None.
Low-carb diets cannot make up this amount.
Yes, they can, and they do. The human body makes perfectly sufficient substrates for the energy provision for all of its organs itself. Perfectly sufficient in the form of glucose via gluconeogenesis and also through ketones through ketogenesis. Okay? That's fine. There's no problem. None at all.
And that's why people often report brain fog or symptoms like that when they're on low-carb diet.
No, that is what happens when they suddenly change their diet from one thing to another thing too rapidly without doing a sensible transition. And it's in the early phases before their body is able to metabolically adjust to the suddenly changed diet. That's got nothing to do with the diet being low carbohydrate per se. It's about changing the diet from one thing to another thing rapidly. It's always a mistake. It's always going to cause distress to the body. Nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that there's no carbohydrates in the diet. There's still plenty of carbohydrate in the blood, and any shortfall in energy provision is made up for by ketones. Okay, what's next?
It's just based off that little bit so far. Does it seem like the right thing to do to cut out an entire macronutrient?
Carbohydrates are not required in the human diet. They are required as an energy source for several of our tissues that require carbohydrates to function, and our bodies have generated, through natural selection pressures, the exact metabolic pathway to produce that energy substrate in the amount required in the form of glucose and ketones. Okay?
should be making up the majority of our diet?
No, it shouldn't be making up the majority of our diet. That's absolutely fucking ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, and without a single scrap of empirical scientific evidence to support it. None at all.
Let's look further. In our
Yes, let's.
body, carbohydrates are stored as glycogen.
In the muscles? Sure.
Our muscles, we can store about
And in the liver, mostly.
300 to 400 grams of glycogen. But in our liver, we store about 70 to 100 grams.
Yeah, so?
Because of this, it's really important that we consume enough carbs so that we can maintain these quite limited stores.
Which is none. Gluconeogenesis takes care of it. Okay, we've covered this.
One of our incredibly important energy systems, the glycolytic system,
Yes.
utilizes carbohydrates in the
Yes, but it doesn't care whether you ate those carbohydrates or whether the body generated those itself from non-carbohydrate precursors, such as lactate, glycerol backbones from triacylglyceride molecules, and 1 or 2 gluconeogenic amino acids, for example. Doesn't care a jot whether that glucose was made by the body or whether it was consumed. Okay?
form of glucose and glycogen to fuel high-intensity exercise.
No, again, mistake again there, lovely. No, wrong, totally wrong. All muscle contractions of all intensities require absolutely that glycogenolysis is undertaken to subserve the requirements of making those muscles contract. There are no muscles that will contract at all without glycogenolysis fueling it. Okay? You don't even understand basic exercise physiology clearly.
Here's a little diagram to show when glycolysis provides energy for us, or when
At all times, in all muscle contractions, at all intensities, in all muscle fiber types.
our glycolytic system kicks in. You can see it kicks in.
It's always active. See, this is total nonsense. Absolute rubbish. This is from a textbook, clearly. It's from a textbook. Textbooks are not peer-reviewed scientific evidence of anything. They are someone's opinion. And this is a vacuous opinion written by someone who does not understand exercise physiology and how it works. This is clearly someone who has never read the work of Schulman and Rothman in, I think it was about no, it wasn't. It was before 2000. I think about 1993, from memory, was when that work was started to become really popular. Anyway, you need to go and find that work. Or indeed, you can have a look at the numerous reviews that I have published as an author in the peer-reviewed literature on this topic, Tilly. Search for me by name and you'll find out where it is that you've got this so completely, badly, utterly wrong. Or indeed, you might even just binge watch all my YouTube videos, both here and on that other platform I was talking about earlier, where I've spoken quite a bit about exercise physiology and how the energetics of it are quite different from what you might read in a textbook. Okay? No. There is no intensity of exercise where you can exercise without using glycogenolysis at all. None.
In after the first couple of seconds, and then it slowly dwindles a little bit there. If we have low muscle glycogen, it severely compromises the ability of the fast glycolytic system to
all the systems, because they all rely on the fast glycolytic system. And yes, if you do get limited muscle glycogen storage, it will affect your exercise performance. However, luckily, your resting glycogen level is determined largely by your training status, Tilly, and not by your diet long term. Sure, when you change to a low carbohydrate diet, and most people do that too suddenly overnight, as in without doing an appropriate transition, as I was referring to previously, they will for a time experience a decrement in their exercise performance and indeed in their resting muscle glycogen level a little bit. Yes, they will, until their bodies adjust to that. And then there's no such problem any longer. So I'm still waiting for you to tell us anything that would be of value to us or any reason why we would need to consume any carbohydrates, because we still don't. We will wait, though, for you to come up with something. Perhaps we should stop waiting. Right, what have we got next?
Provide energy for us. And that is energy that we need to perform. So take a guess at what sports rely heavily on the glycolytic system.
All of them. And it's not just sports. Living, being alive, having any muscles on your body at all, even small ones, requires absolutely glycogenolysis for every muscle contraction of every skeletal muscle and every smooth muscle and all the cardiac muscles in your body, actually, at all times. There is no way around it. Actin and myosin filaments will only undertake the sliding filament mechanism of muscle contraction under the energetics provided by glycogenolysis in all muscle fiber types at all times. Sorry about that. What's next?
Team sports or anything classified as high intensity. Have a look at this.
And low intensity as well. The problem is that the evidence of the utilization of the glycolytic system is not evident by most means of looking for it, that most sports scientists did before the Shulman and Rothman work that showed otherwise, that you clearly need to make yourself aware of, Tilly, in order to subserve your development as a person who professes to be somewhat expert in exercise physiology in some way, although you clearly hitherto so far are nothing of the sort, love, I'm sorry. The fact is, it's going on. It's just not obvious that it's going on. The body still relies entirely upon it. It's just not obvious that that's the case, but it's still the case. Okay?
This diagram that I popped up in another video, this talks about what energy systems are used and at what.
And this is also fucking nonsense, all of it. This is complete rubbish. And again, this is from a textbook. This is nothing to do with science. This is somebody's opinion, and it's fucking stupid. It's ignorant of the way that human physiology actually works.
Intensities of exercise they are.
So here, look, aerobic and anaerobic, it says. No, false. There is no anaerobic capacity. There is no ability for human cells to function anaerobically. There is no such thing as the aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. That is fucking nonsense. I've covered it in great detail, both here on my YouTube channel, also on my other platform that I was talking about before, not to mention as a well-published author in peer-reviewed journals. I've written many, many reviews on this topic in my time. Go and search those out and you'll learn a lot, I'm sure.
Are used. Carbohydrates fuel the glycolytic system.
Yes, they do.
Based on this little table,
Why would you base anything on that table? It's fucking nonsense. Taken out of a book, which is somebody's opinion.
means that they fuel high-intensity exercise.
And low intensity as well.
We need carbs.
Yes, and that's why we generate all the carbs we need for that purpose ourselves metabolically using gluconeogenesis. Okay?
Rate at which glycogen depletes is directly related to the intensity of the exercise.
That's part of the peripheral governor mechanism that makes sure that the body exercise capacity is limited within the range that is physiologically capable of in that human being, so that you don't do irreversible damage to yourself and or cause yourself to die. Makes perfect sense. Still waiting for you to say anything sensible.
Or the sport that we are engaging in. And glycogen is absolutely key for about moderate to high intensity.
All exercise intensities. You cannot contract a single muscle fiber, not ever, without glycogen, not even once. No muscle fibers will contract without glycogenolysis, none at all.
Exercise. In things like resistance training or repeated sprint training or team sports, our glycogen stores become significantly depleted.
Yes. Because that's fatiguing work, and your body has a peripheral governor that makes wow, it's like I just cannot believe that there are so many people on the internet with so little grasp of the material that they're making themselves out to be expert in. It's fucking incredible. It's exasperating. It's exhausting, Tilly. Goodness sake. Really? Wow. Incredible.
Glycogen can deplete as much as 20 to 50% after just a few sets and repetitions.
Yes, that's right. We know this.
Of resistance training. Now, long-duration aerobic exercise primarily
All exercise is aerobic.
relies on fat as a fuel source.
Nonsense. Absolute fucking nonsense. Once again, that assertion is based on fallacious ideas gathered by people using indirect calorimetry, respiratory gas analysis to make such an assertion. There are problems with that, huge problems with that, which again I've covered in great detail as a well-published commentator on the science in the literature. Tilly, perhaps you should go and check that out.
However, performance in long-duration aerobic exercise is also compromised by glycogen depletion.
That's because all muscle contractions at every exercise intensity throughout the entire spectrum is dependent entirely upon glycogenolysis. No surprise.
Glycogen usually becomes impaired or decreases around that 45-minute mark for endurance athletes.
That depends entirely on intensity and training status, in fact.
Switching sports again, here's a little diagram to show how glycogen is depleted in a soccer match. You can see it says after the game, 36% of muscle fibers.
Yes, we know glycogen becomes depleted when you undertake exercise. That's the design. There is a resting storage capacity of glycogen, and when it becomes depleted to a certain level, that compromises your ability to contract your muscles. Thus, they are self-protecting. Okay?
Were rated as almost completely empty, and 11% of the muscle fibers were rated as completely empty. That is a massive decrease in glycogen.
Yes, we're aware that this occurs, but this has no bearing on whether you should consume carbohydrates in your diet or not, Tilly, because the answer is still no, you shouldn't.
And I mean, we can see this in other sports as well, with rugby league players losing approximately 40% of their glycogen after a competitive match.
Yes.
Now let me pose this question. If you were to start off the game with lower glycogen stores because you're on a low-carb diet...
Yeah, but that doesn't happen once you've adjusted to the low-carb diet, Tilly. That's the whole point. Your resting glycogen level will recover and rebound to where it was before you started doing the low-carbohydrate diet, because it's largely training status determined, and instead of getting the glucose from eating them, your body generates it more effectively and more efficiently, and you're metabolically adapted. So you still don't need any carbohydrates in your diet, ever.
How do you think you would perform? Contrary to popular belief...
Well, if you had compromised muscle glycogen when you started an event, then you would also have compromised performance. That's no surprise.
If you are eating a low-carb diet, your glycogen stores still deplete. This is because...
No, they don't once you're metabolically adapted. False again, Tilly.
Because our body doesn't just suddenly switch to using fat as a fuel just because there's a lack of glucose or glycogen. And this is...
That's why you need a metabolic adaptation period. That's why you need to transition your diet slowly and not do it overnight if you want to continue to perform in sports while your body is transitioning.
Because fat is not a fuel in high-intensity exercise.
Yes, it fucking is. That assertion is another falsehood, once again derived from errors of interpretation of respiratory gas analysis. It absolutely still is.
I'll show you more specifically how that glycogen depletion impacts our performance, but for now, I just wanted to...
We know how muscle glycogen depletion impacts performance badly. We understand this. We all understand this. That still does not mean that you are required to consume carbohydrates in your diet, because you are still capable of producing all the carbohydrate you require from glucose precursors using gluconeogenesis, Tilly. Okay?
Show you how crazy it is, the amount that we actually lose after just one match. Knowing all of this and knowing how the energy systems work and—
You don't though, Tilly. You have no fucking idea how the energy systems work, clearly, obviously. You have shown perfectly sufficient evidence in this video alone that you do not have the first fucking clue about this topic.
Knowing that we still lose glycogen even on a low-carb diet, it kind of makes you wonder how and why the low-carb diet became all the rage. And
that started happening about 4.5 million fucking years ago, love. That's how we've absolutely evolved, without any question, unequivocally. The evidence is in. It's in the form of stable isotope testing from the collagen derived from the skeletal remains of human beings, found all over the planet, of all ages over about 10,000 years old, right back to the very beginning. Okay? We're done here. Also, more recently, they've also added in a new one with some zinc isotope testing, which corroborates. So we're very, very sure on how we absolutely have gained our nutrition as a species for a very, very, very long time. And it's very, very low carbohydrate. Sorry about that.
there are some aspects of this propaganda in the research.
Yes, propaganda in the research, says this person here who has clearly absolutely no idea how the metabolic function of human beings work. Never heard of gluconeogenesis, apparently. No idea how the energetics of muscle contraction are managed by the human physiological system at all, clearly, and who thinks that the appropriate source of information for people is someone's opinion out of a textbook. Propaganda, you say? Okay, good.
Could be quite convincing when taken.
This is the problem with every child wins a prize, and your opinion is valid too, because it fucking isn't, love. Your opinion is not fucking valid here. It's inane. It's fucking ridiculous. It's stupid. It's ill-educated in the extreme. It's wrong. Okay? Sorry. Those are the facts.
Taken at face value. Primarily, what I'm talking about is the fact that low carbohydrate diets,
The fact you say, yes.
have the potential to alter our cell signaling pathways.
So does every dietary intervention of every kind. They all affect our cell signaling. That's how it works. Our cell signaling works by reacting to the situation in which we place our cells. Stunning, isn't it?
They can promote adaptations related to endurance performance, and low-carb diets can block the pathways that are related to the ability to put on muscle. So within the endurance...
They can, but they don't necessarily if you do it right. For which you'd need an understanding of human physiology. So you'd probably need to talk to someone like me who does have such an understanding, and not someone like Tilly who clearly does not.
Endurance community, obviously we want to promote endurance adaptation, and therefore low-carb diets have become quite popular in this space, and it's kind of extended to other sports as well. Low-carb diets are also really popular because, like I said in the beginning, they're an elimination diet, so it's essentially just calorie restriction.
No, calories are heat, we've covered that. It's not calorie restriction at all. False.
For many people, they might feel that this is something they want because unfortunately our society puts a stupidly high value on thinness.
I would suggest that people go and have a look at this young lady's Instagram account, which is splattered with photographs of her wearing minimal clothing, showing off her, apparently. This is ridiculous. This is hypocritical nonsense of the highest order. Seriously, lads, I think you should go and check it out. Anyway, that's for another day.
The elimination part of the diet as well might mean that lots of people are removing their food intolerances. So anecdotally, they might feel better. In my own personal...
Or maybe it's because a low-carbohydrate diet is absolutely species-specific and appropriate for human beings. Absolutely, it is how we have derived our nutrition. It is our nutritional approach. It is our niche. And we've been in that niche for about 4.5 million fucking years. Maybe that's what had something to do with it, rather than just because it's an anecdote. And yes, maybe it's because you eliminate food intolerances. And what are people intolerant to? Well, they're intolerant to things that are not fucking food for humans, like plant material. That's not food for a human. So, of course, a large number of people are intolerant to them. My word, we are still waiting for something intelligent to come out of your mouth, love. Anyway, let's move on.
Personal view, cutting out an entire macronutrient.
They are not required. You are capable of manufacturing all the glucose you require yourself. We've covered this.
Is just not a good idea.
Yes, it is a good idea because it's species appropriate and species specific. And the consumption of excess exogenous carbohydrates is absolutely, definitely, unequivocally problematic for human health and human longevity. Without any question whatsoever. Wrong again, love.
Not sustainable.
Yes, it is sustainable. I've been eating a largely ketogenic diet for longer than I suspect you have been on the planet, love. Considerably longer than I suspect you've been on the planet. Okay? 27 years is how long I have been eating almost no carbohydrates to speak of. That's pretty fucking sustainable. What's next?
And once more, I'm going to yell into the camera that it is biochemically impossible to support high-intensity exercise without carbohydrates.
Correct. That's why your body can generate all of its own carbohydrates, and you still don't need any carbohydrates in your diet, not one single gram ever. What do you say, Ted, when someone says to you that you must eat carbohydrates in order to do well in exercise?
Bollocks!
That's what I thought you'd say.
I repeat this again because I've seen
It doesn't make it correct. But it's kind of partly correct in that you are correct that physiologically carbohydrate is required for muscle contraction, all of them. However, you are then making the mistake of asserting that therefore you must eat carbohydrates, which is false. Okay? Completely false.
it popularized that when you cut out carbs, like I mentioned earlier, you immediately switch to using fat for fuel. And
Well, you don't. You need an adaptation period.
that could be good because we do have a lot of fat on our bodies.
Some of us. I don't personally. Again, I suggest you go and check out Tilly's IG account, boys, and see whether she does or not.
far more fat than we do glycogen. But our glycolytic energy system just does not use fat. It just...
That's right. That's why we are able to make our own fat. Because, for most of the last 4.5 million years, there wasn't carbohydrate available to us like there is today. That's why we've evolved ways of making it in the right amount.
doesn't. And I know in this part I'll have some people disagree, but endurance sports like marathons, triathlons, or long-distance cycling, they are not high-intensity activities.
No, they're not. And they're also not sensible things for human beings to attempt. Frankly, we're not physiologically designed for that. That's not a good idea.
They primarily rely on fat oxidation for fuel. And
that's not true either, Tilly. That's false. Completely false.
They can use fat for fuel because it's a low intensity and there is oxygen present.
There's always oxygen present. For God's sake, Tilly, this is ridiculous. The air all around us in the atmosphere is about 21.09% oxygen. When we breathe it into our lungs, 21.09% oxygen. Even at the highest level of exercise intensity at the end of a ramp test, volitional to exhaustion style exercise test, when we're working at our highest capacity of oxygen consumption, the air that we breathe out of our lungs is still around about 15% oxygen. Whoops. Seriously, you need to stop making these kind of videos until you've gained an education in this field, which takes several decades, by the way, to get to a point where you actually understand this material. You can't do a 5-minute weekend course and then suddenly be an expert in exercise physiology. It doesn't work that way, all right?
Go back and look at the article that I previously showed you, where rugby league players experience a 40% decline in glycogen content.
Yes, we're aware of that. As I said at the time, we're very well aware of it.
And post-match. And now we're going to highlight it. It's whether or not they started with a high carb or a low carb diet.
There you go. Isn't that amazing? The very thing that actually debunks your whole point, and now you want to highlight that as your argument, just to show us how well educated in this field you clearly are not. All right. Oh, dear, oh dear. Why do you think that was, Tilly? Why do you think it was that it didn't matter what kind of diet they were on? Maybe it's because the muscle glycogen level is, the resting muscle glycogen level is largely determined by your training status and not by the diet. Okay.
And by now you guys should know why, because this is how we support performance at high intensity.
At all intensities, remember? We've covered this. All intensities require glycogen.
You with me? Now finally
No, not really, love. I don't get it. I don't get why you think it is that you should be making these videos, frankly, at all.
part that you've probably been waiting for. Let's talk about how carbohydrates impact our ability to perform. This study on well-trained cyclists showed that higher carbohydrate diets were associated with increased cycle performance.
And how long did this study go on for? How was it performed? What diet were the people on beforehand? How long was the transition into the treatment diets? Did we have genetically identical sets of twins being tested against each other as research pairs? Were they kept in labs to ensure appropriate adherence to the exercise protocol? Was the signal-to-noise ratio within the range that would lead us to believe that the findings were of any value whatsoever anyway? I think you'll find the answer to all those questions as you've been fooled. You've been taken in, Tilly, because you're actually completely lacking in the experience of science to understand how it is that you've been completely taken in and fooled. Okay?
And increased time to failure. This study on...
Increased by how much? No? You can't just splash up an image of a peer-reviewed piece of so-called science for a few seconds without undertaking any competent analysis of that material whatsoever and expect to be taken seriously by anyone other than by a moron, frankly. And people that follow my channel at large are not morons, Tilly. And now there's thousands and thousands of them that are going to see this video and see how destitute your attempt at being an expert was. Whoops. I know I'm a bad man. I'm a bully. Yes, absolutely. No, Tilly, it's fair game. You put yourself out here. You made yourself out to be an expert. Okay, you had no business doing that because you're not. All right?
Professional soccer players showed that those who consumed a higher carbohydrate diet covered more distance in games.
Over what period? Again, with the experimental protocol, what was it? How did they determine any of this? No?
All speeds compared to the low-carb team. And I mean, this just wasn't one player. 20 players on the high-carb diet outperformed 20 others on the low-carb diet.
Outperformed, did they? What was the score of the games? Because the measurement of performance in a soccer game, I think you'll find, Tilly, is the team that scores more goals is the team that wins the game, irrespective of how many meters they ran during the game. Okay? It might well be that one of those teams made 4 attacking manoeuvres into their opposition's territory and scored 4 goals and spent the rest of the game defending at their own end in a much more low-intensity zone, and the other team were kept out, and the team that covered much less ground might have still won the game 4-0, for example. That's just one example of how mindless this kind of cock-splattery really is, this kind of fuck-trumpetery by ass monkeys like you who actually don't have the first fucking clue what they're talking about, who just like to make these little films. Okay? It's just nonsense. It's rubbish. Okay, do some science and then come back to us and talk to us about science. Until you are a well-experienced, well-published author of scientific materials in your own right, you have no business talking about science. This is not your field of expertise. Sorry about that.
If you're wondering why soccer is considered high intensity...
Because it is. It's been shown to be so. High intensity burst, repeat, with significant rest periods in between, aspects of very high intensity. It's more continuous than something like, say, rugby league or rugby union, absolutely. But nonetheless, soccer is a high intensity sport.
And they cover such great distances. It's because the actions are broken up. They're intermittent. You sprint for a couple of seconds and
what I just said.
Then you rest, or you sprint and then you kick and then you jog. It's broken up.
Yes, you said that. And so did I, only much more parsimoniously.
Intensities change throughout the match, and still primarily the overall intensity is quite high. This, of course, can change throughout the match, and the main energy system working might shift depending on how long.
All the energy systems are working at all intensities of exercise in all human beings at all times. All of them.
The athlete is playing for. Please also remember, as I say this, our energy systems always work simultaneously. There's just one that takes the brunt of the work, and then they kind of switch.
No, that's not true either. That's a false model. That's a bad way of thinking about things.
Over, but our body never works in isolation.
The area under the curves of energy provision pretty much end up being, across exercise, end up being pretty much identical, actually. Again, you need to look at the Schulman and Rothman work to understand this.
Bit of a tangent, sorry. Let's keep looking at how our performance is affected by carbohydrates. In elite race walkers, they found that when on a low-carb diet, the exercise...
For how long? And how many subjects? How was that study run and maintained? Same questions as previously, basically.
Exercise economy was impaired, and this just means that the athletes require more...
How long had they been on a low-carbohydrate diet before this testing was undertaken? Was there sufficient time for a metabolic adaptation?
Oxygen for every movement that they do. The same researchers also found that a keto diet lessens the training-induced performance improvements. Now,
No. There is no study that's found that anywhere in the literature. That is a false claim. I don't know where the fuck you got that from. Where the purple fuck did you get that conclusion from? Because there's no study that shows that.
Train, with the whole idea being that the training will help improve the performance.
That's what training is for, yes.
If it was concluded that a keto diet means that we can translate less of our training to performance...
Well, that's nonsense. It was concluded. By whom? And on the basis of what empirical evidence that would underpin such a conclusion? See, research is litigated with empirical evidences, Tilly, not with people's opinions about numbers. It's with the actual number. Have you got some actual numbers for us? There's only two things that is important here in science. What numbers were collected and exactly what methodology was used to collect those numbers. Those two things inform us on the utility of the information. And you haven't talked about any of that stuff at all. You've shown us a couple of images of some papers for a few seconds without actually analysing those bits of work at all for veracity or utility in any way, shape or form. And you've made a bunch of vacuous and incorrect statements about exercise physiology. Not good enough.
Then that is a pretty good indicator that a low-carb keto diet is not an appropriate nutrition.
No, it isn't. It's nothing of the sort. That's your vacuous, mindless opinion. And it's not underpinned by any science, none whatsoever. I know, I'm an expert scientist, and you are not.
Strategy. In resistance training, high carbohydrates can help to promote muscle protein synthesis.
And so can have a good level of resting muscle glycogen and an appropriate training status and an appropriately designed and executed training program with sufficient and appropriate rest. And you still don't need a single gram of carbohydrates in your diet, not one ever, still.
And this is because of that cell signaling stuff that I mentioned earlier. Glycogen can act as a regulator for the cell signaling processes that upregulate hypertrophy. So
yes, indeed. And so that's why when you undertake training and your muscles store more glycogen, that signaling cascade occurs, whether or not the glucose that made that glycogen was consumed in the diet or whether it was manufactured by the body itself from gluconeogenesis, Tilly. Okay?
essentially what this means is more carbs equals bigger muscles.
No, it doesn't. Again, that is absolute fucking nonsense. It's a half-truth because you still don't need a single gram of carbohydrates in your diet, not one ever.
Low glycogen content, on the other hand, can inhibit the muscle building.
Yes, we know that. We understand that. But that's got nothing to do with whether you are consuming carbohydrate in your diet or not.
It activates a separate cell signaling pathway. Nancy Clark from Team USA Taekwondo wrote a blog post citing...
Oh, a blog post. Well, that's some great sciencing.
Lots of the researchers that I'm referencing here today. Her overall conclusion...
So, the researchers and the opinion of the researchers is not what's relevant here. What's relevant is what numbers were collected using what exact methodology. That is all.
Conclusion was that athletes with depleted muscle glycogen experience needless fatigue.
Well, that's true. They do.
Sluggishness, poor workouts.
Yes, we get it. We understand that, and it's what it's expected because we understand that glycogen is vital for exercise. However, what we also understand over here in the real world is that the body is capable of generating all the glucose it requires itself, and it doesn't need to consume any in the diet, none at all, not 1 gram ever, still.
And reduced athletic performance. Nancy also highlights CrossFit athletes who consumed less than 40% of their total calories from carbohydrates.
Over what period of time? After what sort of transition? How many of them? What were the differences empirically? And what was the signal-to-noise ratio? Tell us a bit about the standard error around the measurement of these particular things and in what way were they measured exactly? No? Again? Just putting up a study with CrossFit athletes and writing some words out of that, out of their context, will not do it, Tilly. That is not doing science. That is not educating the public. That is not being responsible at all. It's ridiculous. Okay? And still at the end of the day, everything I've said has been pretty redundant because actually at the very beginning of the video, I covered it. The exact dietary requirement for carbohydrates in human beings is not 1 gram ever at any time, whether you're an athlete or not. Those are the facts. That's what the science tells us. We're done. The rest of it's just for entertainment, really, and education of my folks who want to know, A, why it is that you're so ignorant, and B, where exactly is your Instagram account? Maybe, I don't know.
Were outperformed by those who consumed a higher carbohydrate diet. I truly think that the bulk of the research sides with high carbohydrate diets.
That's right, because it's bought and paid for. Yes, that doesn't mean it's correct, accurate, of veracity or utility. The actual evidence, the empirical evidence that's available in the body of literature that exists does not support your ridiculous conclusion about carbohydrates in the diet at all. Simply doesn't. Sorry about that.
Being the best nutrition strategy for whatever sport you are in.
No, that's nonsense. Complete fucking nonsense.
Research that doesn't side with this is often anecdotal or it fails to account for practices that happen during the actual competitive event. So
just like every single fucking study you've cited in your little video here, Tilly, the complete lack of control of confounding variables that are uncontrolled and collinearities and other problems that make this utter hogwash and propaganda that you've been sucked into, frankly. You're young enough, there's still chance for you to change direction and to learn something from your errors thus far. I hope you do it before your health does abandon you, and it will, sooner or later. It absolutely will on a diet that's rich in carbohydrates, because that is a mistake, absolutely. It's offset at the moment by your youth and by your high level of physical activity yourself. That will not last. Mark my words. Listen to someone with decades and decades more life experience and indeed scientific knowledge and prowess than yourself, love. Put your ego on the shelf for a minute or two to just actually stop and think about this. Okay, why would I be saying what I'm saying here? What would I possibly have to gain other than a few views on this video? Well, several thousand views. Quite a number of thousand views, sure. But then I get that on all my videos. So why would I pick on you particularly? It's because you're wrong. And it needs to stop. This misinformation on the internet needs to fucking stop. Okay?
What I mean by that is that researchers might report that an athlete is on a low-carb diet prior to the event, but then during the race or during the match, they consume a lot of those like simple sugar, the glucose packets that you use for energy to help them get through the match or help them get through the race. But
how do you know that they did or didn't do that? You're just making shit up now.
Carbs count too, and they're often left out of the research method. One final thing.
So your opinion about how research methodology is on. Have you ever actually undertaken a single research project yourself, love, at all? Ever? No? I suspect not. Otherwise, it'd be on your record of qualifications and credence as a strength and conditioning coach. And I personally have not only been on that side of the desk, undertaking research projects and publishing multiple research works, review articles, etc. in my significant academic career prior to now, but I've also sat on the other side of the desk as well as a peer reviewer many, many times. And it makes me laugh when people like you make out like you have the first fucking clue of what you're talking about when it comes to science. It's fucking ridiculous. Who do you think you are? Wow.
That I wanted to mention in this video is that carbohydrates can help us from being overtrained. High carb diets have the ability to lower our rate.
So can training appropriately with an appropriate volume at an appropriate intensity. Get that right and you won't have an issue with overtraining.
Ratings of perceived exertion, which means that we find workouts.
Ratings of perceived exertion. Anecdotes from people about how they feel about how tired they are is what that is. Good. That's not science either, love.
It's easier. They combat fatigue. They help us recover better.
No. Ratings of perceived exertion are not markers of fatigue. They are anecdotes about how people feel at that time.
They're therefore able to help us tolerate higher loads and train for longer.
That's not necessarily a good thing. In fact, it's usually a very bad thing. Most people train way too much volume at an intensity that's way too low. That's what leads them to problems, not whether or not they're eating carbohydrates, which they still do not need to eat any of ever.
Those of us who are on lower carbohydrate diets may be more susceptible to slipping into that realm of overtraining.
And maybe not too. That's the great thing about the word maybe, as it leaves the other thing entirely on the table. And what you've just said there doesn't inform us on which is most likely at all.
Of course, there are other factors that contribute to this as well. It's not just diet. So with all of this in mind, if watching your nutrition is something that you're into, I want you to make sure that you vary your carbohydrate intake.
No, I want you to remove carbohydrates from your intakes because they're not required and they are absolutely, demonstrably, definitely problematic at some point. No two ways about it. It's a mistake to consume carbohydrates exogenously in your diet.
Throughout the training periods in the year. So if you're entering a competitive season where your training demands are really high and you're having to do competitions every week, then I want you to eat more carbohydrates to support this.
Yeah, but love, you don't have the first clue of what you're talking about. So why would you be giving people advice on their nutrition? Why would you do that? Are you giving them gynecological advice as well? How about legal advice or investment advice? Why don't you do that too, just because you feel like it? What qualifies you to give any advice at all to people on nutrition? Do you have any credibility in this field whatsoever? Wow.
If your training's taking a back seat for a little while, or you're in an off season, then slightly reducing your carbohydrate intake might be a good idea.
And might not too. Depending on your particular situation, it will be a good idea, by the way, to reduce carbohydrates, because it's never a good idea to consume carbohydrates in your diet, by the way.
Always, we do this because our body is amazing at adapting to stimuli that we expose it to. So we want to make sure that eating carbohydrates at the times that we need it,
which is never, ever, under any circumstances, pretty much,
remains effective. And to do this, we need to have variation in our nutrition.
No, we don't. We need to eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. We don't need to eat a varied diet. We are a specialist animal, just like every other animal. We have a niche that we've evolved in. It's obligate hypercarnivore. Okay?
Well as our training. And whew, talked for a while there, but that is it for me today, guys.
Thank Christ for that. To be fair, that was shithouse, Tilly. Really fucking shithouse from start to finish. Sorry about that. Got to be honest.
I hope you learned something. I highly recommend that you check out some of the research below if you're still a little...
The research? If people were going to check out the research, why don't you let them check that out for themselves instead of splashing up an image out of context from part of that research that informs us in no way on the question that you think it informs us on? That wasn't educational. That was just vox pop nonsense. That was propaganda from you. That was shithouse.
A little bit, but carbs all the way, guys.
No. Absolute fucking nonsense. Wrong.
If you want me to make a video in the future talking...
No, I really don't. I really want you to stop, actually, Tilly, completely until you have educated yourself on these topics. Because as it stands, you know nothing about nutrition whatsoever, nothing about human physiology whatsoever, nothing about the energetics of muscle contraction whatsoever, nothing about anything you're talking about in this video, ignorantly giving dangerous contraindicated misinformation to people, telling them they need to go and eat a bunch of carbohydrates. That is the last fucking thing in the world a human being needs to do, whether they are an athlete or not. This is disgraceful.
Amount how much carbohydrate to
None, still.
eat, or how to periodize it alongside your training plan, then please do let me know in the comment section below. Please remember to like and subscribe.
You know, we won't be doing that either. But I suspect many of my viewers will go and check out your Instagram account. Go and check it out.
Like this kind of content, I truly appreciate any and all support, and it'll really help the channel to grow. If not,
Yeah, I tell you what else would help your channel to grow. Giving out correct, valid, scientifically robust information instead of ridiculous, nonsensical propaganda and opinions that are not underpinned by any training in the field whatsoever in the area in which you're talking. That would be heaps better if you'd do that. I suggest you start doing that from now on. Okay? Cool. What's next? The end, probably.
nothing else. That's it from me, guys.
Excellent, the end. Right, quite enough of Tilly. Quite enough of Tilly's fucking ridiculous nonsense for one day, and indeed for any number of days whatsoever. That was just absolutely fucking appalling, as I said. Okay, there you go. Join me next time when someone will be wrong on interwebs, because there really is no sign of it slowing down anytime soon. Okay, shall we have some music then? 2, 3, 4.